Okay, so welcome back everyone. Again, this is Professor Tarabishi from the George Washington University, and this is the US SPAC Business Leadership Series. And we've been having a good run this year with the topics of high interest. But this topic itself, millennials as employees, operational culture for the largest demographic, or we're just talking about the millennials itself, was a big hit last year when we did it. And there's so much attention to it and so much discussion about it that we knew right after the webinar, we said, you know, we need to bring this back. So when we were talking to our partners, Wells Fargo and US SPAC that's been doing this series, they all agreed that this was an important topic to discuss again, especially what's going on today in terms of politics, in terms of business, in terms of just the youth around the world and what's going on. We said we need to bring this topic again for further discussion, for further elaboration. And we're excited about it. I think its timing is absolutely perfect, especially now in these hot days of summer. It's to talk about kind of what's going on with the millennials. I keep reading articles all over the map about the way they do business, about how they see business, and employees are kind of scratching their head and saying, what's the code? What's the rule book on all of this? So I'm delighted to bring an expert on this topic and someone that will shed some light on this and kind of give us the scoop, the kind of what's going on with these millennials and then how do we deal with them as employees, but also as human beings as well. They sometimes, for us, they seem like aliens, but they're not. And they're our children and nephews and nieces and cousins. So I'm delighted to introduce Mr. Tim Hwang, founder and CEO of FiscalNote. Tim, you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, so the question for you is, we've been invaded by these aliens called millennials around the world, and we've hired them, but we have no idea how to handle them. So please tell us, what's the rule book on talking to these aliens? But they are so smart, and they are so energetic that just we can't get rid of them. We need them more and more as every day passes. So I pass the baton to you to kind of guide us through this webinar.
Sure thing. So hi everybody, my name is Tim. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called FiscalNote. Just a brief background on what we do and then kind of get into it. So FiscalNote is the largest legal tech startup in the United States now. We have about 200 employees in the United States and in Korea. And I would say the vast majority of our staff was very solidly in that millennial staff. Now, what I want to talk to you about today is, millennials as employees, and the topic that we're going to be talking about is, operationalizing culture for this very large demographic that's, coming into every role across the company. So, the first thing that is really important is to really think about the culture of the organization. And so, I want to kind of talk about some of the values that we have at our company and the sort of how we've operationalized them within our business. But this quote that Peter Drucker, very famous business professor and writer and author, has talked about, is very famous for its clarity, which is that culture is strategy for breakfast. Now, for a lot of new companies and organizations that are operating in the 21st century, it's really important that as you start to ingest more and more millennials, that the culture of the organization, the companies that you have the proper incentives and the right structures and the right systems and the processes to be able to continue to attract and retain, millennial talent across your organization. So the kind of concept of culture, before I kind of get into it very heavily, is that you want to define what you stand for, and then you really want to create some level of ownership among employees, and then you want to operationalize and execute this within your businesses and organizations. Now, the definition of culture is very hard. A lot of even very large companies to this day struggle with the mission, the values, the vision of the company and whatnot, and what you're trying to accomplish. But as I'll kind of get into it, these things are really, really, really important for millennial employees as they think about which careers they want to choose and which pathways want to go down. The concept of creating ownership is also incredibly important. You can't just kind of come down from Mount Sinai with a big tablet of goals and whatnot. You really have to create some sense of ownership among their jobs, and then you have to obviously operationalize and execute against the results that you want and the culture that you're trying to define. So delving into it and defining culture, what is company culture? For a lot of folks that have held different positions, managerial positions before. This is not new to you. Company culture is a pattern of shared basic assumptions learned by a group as it solves its problems of external adaptation. So any market issues or customer issues or whatever the case may be, an internal integration, right? And so it's this massive product of joint learning that employees have amongst themselves to create a basic set of expectations on how to operate. Now, this is incredibly important because the set of expectations and assumptions that millennials have as employees is actually very different from previous generations. And so let's kind of delve into a little bit more about what specifically are millennials looking for, right? Now, the first answer that a lot of people say that they're just looking for more money, right? They're looking for increased compensation, they're looking for increased incentives and rewards, but actually, those incentives are actually not even listed in the top 3 reasons why a millennial might be attracted to a specific job. If you look here, the first and most important, 65% of, and this is from a recent PwC poll of millennials, is that 65% are looking for the opportunity for personal development. Like that is why they choose a specific career, a specific job. Number 2, people are looking for the reputation and the mission of the organization, right? What is this company trying to accomplish? What is the vision that they're trying to accomplish? Number 3 is the role itself. And then number 4 is the kind of starting salary of pay and whatnot, right? And so radically different. I think people are constantly looking for mission. They're looking for a vision. They're looking to really be driven by a specific goal. And that's why, really defining your culture and defining the mission of your company matters an incredible amount for millennials. A couple of other statistics here. When asked which of the following training and development opportunities would you most value from an employer, they're looking for, working with strong coaches, mentors. They're looking for rotations to be able to get a lot of exposure, different positions. They're looking for further support, and so they're essentially looking for a very strong learning environment, right? An environment where they're paid to learn, essentially. These are the types of environments that are really, really attractive for these folks. When asked which 3 benefits would you most value from your employer, now, 22%, and this is the number of people that ranked it in first place, put training and development as number 1. They put flexible working hours as number 2, and then number 3 was actually cash bonuses. So counterintuitively, it's not all about compensation. It's not all about salaries and incentives and whatnot, but it's really thinking about the type of environment, the mission that you're trying to build, the culture that you're building within your organization, and the values by which you're trying to implement them across your organizations. So this is sort of what I call the modern millennial social contract, right? And this is an agreement basically between an employee and an employer about the set of expectations that they have for the position and what they want to accomplish. Now, in my opinion, the ultimate perk for millennial workplace is filled with motivated and talented professionals on a mission, right? Everyone is driven. Everyone is trying to accomplish something. They are constantly being trained and developed to accomplish that mission. And having a workplace filled with people that are all motivated and aligned around that mission is really, really important. And the modern millennial social contract comes down to this, right? It's basically you want to achieve some very relentless goals. You want to drive a lot of performance. You want to drive a lot of effort across the millennial workforce. In order to do that, you give them a sense of mission, you give them a strong culture, and you give them the freedom to be able to fail and to be able to learn and develop such that, within the context of, professional development and leadership development, managerial development, they're able to kind of push themselves to the next level and get to that next level of performance. Now, here are a couple of the values at our company that, that we try and institutionalize across the board. I've thought a lot about how we think about these values and how we operationalize values, which I'll kind of get into later. But the values here essentially, are crafted from millennial executives for millennial employees for the purpose of running a millennial organization. Now, as you see, the first value that we put up there was level up, right? And that's our way of saying, you need to continue to invest in your professional development. You need to continue to Managers are expected to coach compassionately. They're expected to lead the way. They're expected to provide opportunities for professional development. All of our employees are given, constant feedback about their performance and whatnot. And so the default pathway for people is upwards, right? You're constantly trying to get better at what you're trying to, what your job is. Having a bias for action, right? So giving people a lot of autonomy to be able to make decisions within their jobs, within the context of constantly leveling up and constantly learning, being able to accomplish more and more things, owning the job, having more responsibility. Now, the flip side of having more responsibility is accountability, right? And so being able to be accountable for the mistakes that you make and taking those learning lessons and making sure that they don't become repeat things that happen over and over again. You really want people to have ownership of their jobs and to really care about the performance. The last two values I'll point out here, be aligned and transparent. That's really, really important for driving ownership of some of these values, and support the family. So really thinking about, again, this kind of supportive environment for professional development and for constant leadership development, managerial development. So, these values are things that we've thought about. When we first started our company, we thought to ourselves, what is the ideal workplace that we would want to build, right? Like, if we could just build a company from the ground up and just define the ideal workplace for ourselves, what would be the values by which our managers and our employees and our executives would all adhere to? And so these are essentially the values that we had kind of, not necessarily crowdsourced, but kind of come together and said, we want to build a company that really believes in the following things. So you define these values, you have this mission that you want to accomplish, this vision that you want to accomplish, you created an environment of collaboration, of professional development, of coaching and caring for employees, of constantly upward movement and whatnot. So then the question is, okay, well, how do you drive engagement, right? How do you create a sense of ownership of the company, right, where they actually feel like owners within the company? So our thesis on this is that you create ownership through freedom, right? Freedom to work from home and take unlimited vacation days, work without super onerous processes like pre-approvals and sign-offs and permissions and 10 people interviewing a specific candidate, the freedom to work on big projects and ideas that may not directly be related to your work, the freedom to define what you want to learn and how you want to develop your own career, and the freedom to access information and resources to solve problems that you think are in the best interest of the company. You can't, that's, to say that is radical is probably an understatement, right? Is giving people this freedom, particularly entry-level employees, this freedom is ludicrous, right? And in some ways it's true, because there's a couple of other components that really matter in this, but it's really important that in order to drive engagement and ownership, they really have to feel like they have that freedom to accomplish that mission. So the flip side of freedom, of course, is creating ownership through transparency, right? And so the classic communication mechanism for a lot of tech companies and technology startups is the all-hands meeting, right? So on the left, you'll see this is our company during an all-hands meeting, a couple quarters ago. On the right, you'll see an all-hands meeting that that Google holds, about on a regular basis. And so, in order to create an environment that's mission-driven and vision-driven, but also drive level of performance within the context of freedom, you need to have transparency, right? One of the things that we do at our company is quite literally, after every board meeting, I'll literally take all of our financials, all of our board documents, all of our strategy documents, and blast it out to every employee, every intern, every manager, every executive across the company, and then we'll have an all-hands meeting, and we'll say, is everybody clear about the strategy? Is everybody clear about the resources that we're allocating for different things? Are there any concerns that we can address? Are there any questions that we can answer for you? You kind of create the sense of ownership across the company of the shared goals and the shared mission that you're trying to accomplish, whether it's a quarterly goal, a missional goal, an annual goal, whatever the case may be. Now, our philosophy is that once you have this sense of transparency, then you just get out of the way, right? If you've hired well, you've attracted smart people, they're learning, they're developing, they're constantly being coached by managers, then you give them the freedom, right? You give them the freedom to accomplish whatever they want to accomplish within the context of the ownership that you're creating in the transparent organization. So the last step, of course, and the most meaty of all these different things is operationalizing some of these values within a company culture. And so the core question for culture execution that we ask ourselves is, what behaviors do we value in each other? And so that question was, primarily answered by the values that we had put in place around, leveling up, around creating this, level of professional development, of constant feedback and whatnot. So reinforce our values literally in everything, right? About how we evaluate for hires, how we sell and build our products, how we promote and incentivize our managers. And this is quite literally how you take millennial cultural values and you literally stick it within the operating ethos of the company. So how do we personally at our company operationalize our values, right? And so we think about leveling up, right? Professional development isn't some random department that we stick in talent or in HR. Every manager, every employee, every executive is fully and completely responsible for professional development of their employees, right? So that means annual development plans, live 360 reviews, constant and weekly, monthly, quarterly one-on-ones, providing feedback, management training for those people that are seeking leadership and management training, constant retrospectives on things they may have failed on, postmortems, talking through lessons that they've learned from projects that they might have failed on, or even projects that they've completely succeeded on, really trying to understand what went well and whatnot. The main ethos of this is constant feedback, right? You want to constantly give feedback to people such that they're internalizing that, they're getting better at what they do on a regular basis. Having a bias for action. One of the weird things that we do at our company is that we give an hourglass to all of our employees to kind of tell them that time is a very valuable resource. And then, but more seriously in terms of operations, we clearly define the thresholds for decisions, and we don't put in any owners processes or approvals or anything like that. If you feel like it's within the scope of what you're trying to accomplish, go ahead, right? But you don't need to wait around for some random manager to finally get around to that email or that approval or whatnot, and click the green light or whatever. If we're all aligned in the strategy and we all know what we want to accomplish, and I trust you and you trust me to make the right decisions, then go ahead and have that freedom and that bias for action. The sense of being aligned and transparent, I talked about the kind of quarterly board all hands. We have weekly town halls, constant alignment meetings every quarter, having a forum by which all of our employees can discuss open air concerns and whatnot. Even our office layout, the way we think about our operations is geared towards thinking about how to be fully transparent and collaborative in that respect. Our salaries are all very public. We have biannual retreats that really try and get all of our employees to really think about being aligned and transparent across the board. And finally, thinking about kind of support the family, right? And so we're thinking about the way we think about paternity leave, maternity leave, or sabbaticals, or vacation reimbursement. We provide a vacation reimbursement for people to actually go ahead and take a vacation because they're working so hard. Really trying to create that sense of professional development for employees is really important. So in terms of operationalizing some of these things, it starts with the screening and hiring, right? And so this is where it gets really important, because we never want to fill positions for urgency, right? We want to fill the people. This entire kind of millennial culture only really works if we have smart creatives and we have people that are filling roles for the purpose of that constant professional development piece. So we want to find A players. And the last thing I'll talk about here is explaining the deal, right? And so it's no secret that millennials are highly motivated, ambitious, they're seeking leadership development. They're seeking organizations where they want to go off and be challenged and learn all the time. And so here's the basic deal, right? The deal is, you give me, a couple years of your career. In exchange, I'll give you the opportunities to learn and develop and get to that next stage in your career. It's no secret that, I think most millennials probably will not stick around at a company for years and years and years and decades and decades and decades. And so in order to really attract the best and the brightest, you have to explain the deal, right? And I do this every day in terms of some of our top performers. The deal here is, you may want to go start your own company. You may want to go, do this amazing thing, but just give me a couple of years, and you will find that this opportunity will give you the opportunity to get your career to the next level. Reinforcing with onboarding, right? So once you pick the right people and you get them on board, you really start with kind of how they start within the company, right? So within our company, we specifically identify the role and we evaluate within 90 days, constantly giving them feedback and that rapid iteration process upwards, so that the moment they start, they're constantly getting feedback upwards, right? And so by the time they get fully ramped, we have an employee that's embedded within our culture, constantly seeking feedback and operating at a very high level of performance. It's really important that even just the small stuff matters, right? A lot of employers will go on and they'll kind of ask you to fill out your employment verification stuff and whatnot when you first come in, but really starting with the values and talking about the mission and the vision of what you're trying to accomplish is really important. And so that's the starting point. That's the reason why people join the company, is because they want to accomplish some major mission. They want to feel like their sense of purpose means a lot within the organization. We provide certification-based training. So what this allows for is constant milestones by which people can say they've learned a specific skill set or are progressing towards a certain way, and so that training allows them to kind of accumulate in a very public way the knowledge that they're learning within the organization. When expose them to all functions of the company, right? So they want to be siloed in some random team within some random department. They want to have that exposure to different departments and different functions, so that quite frankly, for many of them who are in the first stages of their career, that they can think about, number one, is this really the career for myself? Number two, how can I develop myself so that I can find more value to certain teams and whatnot across the company? And number three, really thinking about, okay, well, if I have this sense of ownership, right, and I really want to drive some level of shared mission, where's the best way that I can insert myself across the company? And so this is something that that really matters for a lot of entry-level folks. Process and decision making, over communication is really, really, really important, right? You want to communicate the value criterion by which you make these decisions, the mission that you're trying to accomplish. Again, going back to what we had talked about before, really aligning yourself to the kind of purpose of the organization and whatnot is really important. Really thinking about this sense of buy-in and ownership is incredibly important, because, again, in this context of wanting to, feel like they're heard, feel like they have a sense of purpose, having that buy-in is really important. And of course, reinforcing values to support them, right? You need to put your money and your time where your mouth is. And so, when you're building the process, when you're thinking about decisions, really constantly coming back to these things is important. Here again is against professional development. Over the life cycle of the employee, now that they're hired, they're onboarded, they know the processes and whatnot. You want to over-invest in professional growth, right? Understand personal and professional growth for every single team member, challenging them constantly, think up new ideas, creating a strong culture of direct feedback, right? And so thinking about how can you want people to constantly seek that feedback, right? Where they say, how can I get better? How can I get to that next level? You want to give them that flexibility and that little bit of a rope to fail and learn from their mistakes, and encourage, whenever possible, training and learning, right? Pull them aside. You say, hey, I think you did this really well. Hey, I think you need to improve on this. Hey, I think if you improve X, Y, and Z, you'll get to that next level, which is actually very counterintuitive to a lot of older and established organizations where, there's a lot of office politics, people kind of positioning themselves. There's not necessarily a very strong emphasis on professional growth, more just on the goals elements of everything. So you really want to kind of look at the holistic element of the individual and trying to kind of invest in their professional development. And of course, you want to reward through the management, right? So inevitably, as millennials come up through management, and as you have managers, that are, managing a lot of millennials, you want to create a management set of values that really aligns itself with the millennial group, right? So define those management values. Performance review process should, reward and promote those specific values. One of the things that we do as our company, particularly for millennials, is we provide constant management training. Monthly, quarterly, annually. Thinking about the technical aspects of management, right? So even just the basic things around like how to run a meeting, how to create an agenda, how to have one-on-ones, how to do performance review, but even the large things around how to create strategy, how to create efficiency, how to structure specific operations. The people are dying for that type of learning and that professional development. And you want to kind of create this constant conversation, this shared consciousness of what you're trying to accomplish. A couple of our management values here, caring, thinking about how to care for your employees is really important in that context of professional development. Coaching, being data-driven, being very clear, right? So not being part of this kind of whole office politics thing, but communicating effectively and listening well, making sure that their opinions are very are heard. Leveling up, basically modeling the behavior of seeking professional development, seeking leadership development, because at the end of the day, let's be honest, it doesn't matter how old you are, you can constantly be learning, constantly be stretching yourself to that next level. And of course, being accountable for the outcomes of the project and the teams that you have, right? That matters a tremendous amount in terms of the kind of managerial overhead and an air cover that people are seeking. So the last thing, of course, is around branding and communication, right? And you want to clearly and repetitively talk about the mission. You want to be an evangelist, right? And so every manager and every executive should be evangelizing why this organization exists, what we stand for, how we do things, and really highlight the impact of the work that people are doing. Don't communicate, like here's the revenue goal, here's the fundraising goal, whatever the case may be, like why does this organization exist? Like what are we trying to accomplish? And the external internal communications with employees constantly reinforces those internal values. And so that branding and communication and of information to a lot of folks is incredibly important. So with that, I'll wrap up here. I think at our company we've had the great pleasure of working with a lot of very great and talented people, and one of the great lessons that we've learned is really how to take some of these management values and operationalize them. And I think whatever the stage of your organizations, whether it's Fortune 500 or small nonprofit or small organization, whatever the case may be, you will find that these values and the way you operationalize those values matter a tremendous amount, and can be pretty standard applied on a standard basis to millennials across the board. So with that, I will end my presentation, and I think we'll be taking questions.
Great. Great. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hello? Great. Great. Thank you. Thank you. Excellent presentation. I like how you approach culture. Culture is fundamental to a company's success, but also integrating all the young people, all the staff, all the leadership. But the one thing with culture, it's very slow to change, right? If you look, I'm an academic, so I'm going to talk it here. One of the last things you can change in any organization is the culture. How about organizations that are well established, that have been around for a long time, and it's just difficult to change people's minds? What's your recommendation on this?
Yeah. So I've worked in very large organizations before, and I think what I've seen the best is creating safe spaces and environments where you have basically a blank slate of cultural values, and you start from the ground up, right? And you basically highlight that as the what you're trying to get to, right? And so a lot of organizations these days do have separate innovation departments or labs departments, whatever the case may be, that try and embody these types of values and operationalize them from the ground up. But again, you are right in that the cultural values are very hard to change. I think it takes leadership from the top, but it also takes just constant pushing by managers, and just honestly the blocking and tackling of day-to-day management and thinking about what you're trying to accomplish, right? So even if you work at a major bank, right, or very large nonprofit or whatever the case may be, telling as a manager the stories of really making an impact do make a large difference for a lot of millennials, right? Whether it's this small business loan that you gave to this person who was able to expand their restaurant, or this major donation drive that you just ran that had a certain amount of impact for the community, whatever the case may be. It starts in a small way and then starts to kind of pick up speed as you as you attract more talent and as you motivate your teams across the board.
And another question I want to ask here is this whole concept of work-life balance. It's been basically, by the millennials, been thrown out the window. They said, no, we are going to redefine the work-life balance. And you mentioned Korea, and in Korea it's a big deal as well. So it's just not the U.S. It's also in Korea. This whole concept of work-life balance is changing. What's your take on this? I think this is one of the most important things that millennials are focusing on. I need my family time. I need my own personal time. I need to kind of explore my hobbies, the meaning of life. But at the same time, I want to go make money. But money is not the priority here. It has to fit into my meaning of life and how it works. Because I've seen my parents suffer. I've seen my grandparents suffer. And I'm not buying this whole anymore because they betrayed my parents. And they let them go. They suffered. I've seen it all. And even worse now, I'm racking all these debts and in college. And why am I going to be working 40, 50, 60 hours a week? It makes no sense for me. What's your take on this?
Yeah. So, I mean, my personal philosophy is that there's no such thing as work-life balance. These days it's all about work-life integration, right? And so, in an age of like smartphones and like ubiquitous internet and like global business operations and whatnot, it just doesn't make sense to have like a strict 9 to 5, like I'm going to work this time and then I'm not going to work this time. Everything is sort of integrated, and so I think from the perspective of, particularly from the perspective of the millennial, a lot of it comes down to thinking about again, what I said before, right? Particularly with respect to the deal, right? Like the deal is, like you give me your performance, you give me your career, you give me your absolute 120% best for the next 3, 4, 5 years or whatever the case may be. In exchange, I will help you accomplish whatever you're trying to accomplish, right? I will help you accomplish you learning these skill sets, you becoming a better manager, you getting the experience that you want. It's not even about the money at that point, right? It's about like, what are the skills that you want to develop? What do you want to accomplish in your career? And here's the deal, like you give me performance, and in exchange, I'll give you the environment that you need.
All right, so one last question and we'll open up. What's your take on this phenomenon, what I call the Uberization of the workforce? It's no longer that you're committed to one company. You're saying, I'm a knowledge worker. I'm going to figure out my life, my style as an Uber worker, which is basically saying, hire me for my skills, and I'm not committed to you, you're not committed to me, but it's more of a balance between both. How do you see millennials dealing with this? Because they're in the midst of this whole Uber, Airbnb, and you name it, phenomenon, but it's now becoming the normal.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty old school in this regard, but I think, with respect to other millennials, it might be different. Personally, I think, again, it goes back to the deal that I was talking about, right? Like, there is a benefit to being with an organization for several years and being tied down and working within those operations and those processes. The benefit, of course, is like this environment, your access to experienced mentors, the creating a professional network. Like those things are not to be taken very lightly, particularly for people that want to build careers. It is true that in a couple of industries, like transportation, like hospitality, that there is this kind of Uberization of work. What I've been seeing is that it's primarily within like low-skilled labor. It's harder to find those types of applications in, say, software engineering or product management or design or whatever the case may be, just because I think the benefits of the millennial social contract, the deal, is so much more beneficial to be within an organization and have that environment than to kind of try and build that network by yourself. And in some ways, it's not really in their control, but I think for a lot of companies like ours, it is in our best interest to kind of continue to attract and retain people over long periods of time.
Great. Okay, that's an excellent. Michael, you want to open up for questions? See what we have.
Yes, no questions have been received so far, but we encourage the audience to write in your questions, and we'll ask Tim.
Okay.
While we're waiting,
so while we're, go ahead.
I have a question if we can throw it in. Tim, you talked a lot about what you look for in a candidate and how you onboard. Can you talk a little bit about trust? Is trust built through the constant feedback, or do you use the interview process to determine if someone is trustworthy and that they can work within the confines of your culture?
I think trust is built through competence. And so, again, this goes back to the fact that, if you hire well and you constantly give feedback and everybody's aligned towards the goal and you have constant feedback for different team members, the implicit assumption is that everybody that you work with is high performing, that they are committed to their professional development, that they're self-reflective, and that they're constantly iterating upwards in their careers. There's plenty of large organizations that have modeled this behavior as well. I mean, the most extreme examples are ones that have up or out types of HR policies. We try and build kind of a happy medium, but the idea is, of course, this type of environment actually is very much in line with the millennial work ethic and the millennial aspiration to constantly be pushed and constantly kind of go upwards. So if that's the case where you have an organization filled with these people, then there's an implicit assumption around competence. And once you have that implicit assumption on competence, then the rest of it is kind of left to blocking and tackling, just like day-to-day process and whatnot. It's sort of like a sports team, right? Like a football team, right? Like, I'm going to trust the quarterback to essentially, throw the ball in the right direction, and I'm going to trust the receiver to essentially go off and like receive the ball in the right place where I need it to be, right? Like, everybody needs to be playing their part, and everybody needs to be competent in what they're trying to accomplish. And so that's constantly how you build trust over time, in my opinion.
Great. That's one of the key things here. Michael, any more questions coming in?
Come in. This is from Sunin. How do you help your millennial employees interact with the older generation and those at the senior level?
Very good question. It's a hard question. I think that one of the benefits of being a startup, albeit a little bit later stage, is that we can pick and choose our executives and our managers. And our executives are in their mid to late 40s and whatnot. So it's not terribly different from the rest of corporate America. But I think from our perspective, I try and provide some level of leadership around like the things that we value and the things that and the way in which we operate our company, and incentivize managers and executives to align themselves around those types of things. but we also just pick the right people, right? Literally, half the battle in creating the right millennial culture is picking the right managers, picking the right executives, and then having them drive performance on a day-to-day basis with the right values that you have in place. And with respect to the interactions, I think that the transparency that we have, in addition to the open forums for dialogue, do tend to resolve a lot of the conflict that might potentially pop up. So, if we have an older executive or an older manager with, millennial manager or millennial employee, whatever the case may be, we try and air all those concerns out openly, and try and directly resolve those issues through the kind of transparency and the ownership that people have within the company.
We have one more question from Yolanda. How can associations in the nonprofit world target millennials to be a fit, since there are limited opportunities for growth depending on the association size?
Yeah, I think it comes down to mission, right? And in the nonprofit and the association world, so much of it is very mission driven that I feel like they even have an edge or an advantage over a lot of folks in the private sector, where they have real stories with real people, real individuals that they've been able to impact. Whether it's a trade association providing, some level of development or some information or whatnot, or some mission-driven nonprofit that is trying to accomplish some, major global goal. Like, telling those individual stories and communicating those stories is almost even better than the professional development. So on the professional development side, really I think it just comes down to like being open to ideas and allowing them to participate in all aspects of the organization. So the flip side to being in like a giant organization and having constant movement and employees everywhere, and constant movement of managers and whatnot, is having a small, tight-knit organization where people are able to provide impact and feedback around all the strategies and being transparent about the strategies and whatnot, and really allowing them to kind of have more of a buy-in into the organization. And you kind of play to your strengths, right? Small organization, then you kind of create more buy-in, especially if you're in a nonprofit, then you create a lot of mission alignment that I think drives a lot of millennial performance.
Great, this is fantastic. And I knew this webinar was going to be electrifying in the sense of trying to make sense of how do we deal with millennials. Michael, do we have any more questions or no?
No, not at the moment.
Okay, so at this point, I want to end it with one last question here, and then come from you. Actually, and I'm going to give you a scenario here. Let's say you have this young millennial that comes in. He or she is an excellent worker, very, very, very committed, high energy, shows a lot of enthusiasm. You hire them, they work for you 6 months, and then they come to you and tell you, listen, I found a better opportunity somewhere else. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I learned, and off they go. And then a year later, they come asking again for if there's any opportunities in your company. Now, at one moment, there's this whole concept of trust, staying longer, committing to yourself to the company. But at the same time, you can understand their enthusiasm, their energy, and they're looking for a better deal, they're looking for a better adventure, they're looking for better kind of building their careers and lives. But they left. And now they're coming back, kind of potentially looking to saying maybe they missed the opportunity and they realize that, wow, the other one seemed better. What do you do then? You're torn between two sides. One saying, you kind of did bad. We're not taking you back. But at the same time, you know that these are excellent workers. These are excellent additions to your fast-growing company. What do you do?
I think it's on a case-by-case basis. I know that's like the cop-out answer. I think it really you kind of have to take it on a case-by-case basis. We've definitely had those types of situations before, and it really depends on the individual and the circumstance of the situation. Whether the opportunity they went to, their company went bankrupt or whatever, which does happen very often in the technology field. And so, if it's kind of this revolving door, you do want to de-incentivize people that are out of the quote-unquote deal. But, in some ways, you also want to look internally, right? You want to think about, okay, well, hey, why did they leave in the first place? Like, and the reason why I say it's circumstantial is because, when you look at those two opportunities and as a rational person, right, with certain decisions and value criterion, right? If the value criterion that you're deciding opportunities by is which one has, which one affords me the higher trajectory of development, and they find, other organizations that have higher trajectories of development, then you want to ask yourself, like, why do we not have similar trajectories of development within our organization? Is it because, we don't give them enough buy-in? Is it because, we don't provide enough training? Whatever the case may be. And the reality is that it is a competitive job market out there. If for highly ambitious, highly energetic, intelligent individuals, I mean, it is very much in their favor. The market is very much in their favor. So the cost of attracting and retaining people is very high, and so you want to ask yourself, in order to retain these people over time, how, like, what can we fix within our own processes to allow for more leadership and professional development opportunities?
Fair enough. You can look internally to see how you can make things better, and I agree with you on that one. And also, I can agree with you that it was maybe dealing with a family situation, or the company went bankrupt, or something that's an outlier that you say to yourself, yeah, well, we can see that happening. But it really comes down, that person is looking for a better deal. You can see it in their eyes, right? And they're coming back to say, realizing that this was a good deal, and they didn't take it, right? Or they didn't stay to it. But you know that you need them because they're really good, okay? And you're torn between this decision. It's an issue. You said you're old school, so I'm going to throw old school at you, right? It's the issue of being principled. It's about the principle, saying, no, we're not going to do it, even though we really, really want this person. They're really good. Because the principle says they left us, and they didn't care, and now they're coming back. Or you say, we're fast growing. This is good for the company. This is really good for our team. We need that skill. We need that talent, right? And you kind of turn away a little bit. You can ignore it a little bit. But deep down inside, and you said you're old school, the principle's been broken, because that's an old school principle. What do you do?
Yeah.
I'm not putting you on the spot.
Sure. So personally speaking, I think I wouldn't take the deal. But that being said, if you elongate the timelines, right? It's for me, it's a matter of the timelines. It's not really like the principle of the decision, because 6 months is like you're like a mercenary, and there's like you're not aligned to the mission, right? Like, we're trying to accomplish a mission, and you don't align with the values that we're trying to accomplish here. This is actually the case in a lot of Silicon Valley companies, where a lot of employees do have very short tenures, going from one fast-growing company to another fast-growing company to another fast-growing company, which I abhor, because we accomplish a mission, and we want to attract and retain millennials who are mission-driven and who are goal-driven. That being said, there is a happy medium where, and this happens a lot in the private sector or in government. People find an opportunity in one organization, they stay for a year, 2 years, they go to another organization, they stay for 2-3 years, and they lateral back to that organization at a higher management position. Totally fine, and I think it just depends on, it boils down to, number one, the circumstance, and number two, like, whether or not they're aligned against the mission that you're trying to accomplish.
Okay, all right, fair enough. I put you on like a court here, so I will acknowledge your answer, because it's a very difficult question, but I think you're right. I think you have to put a third axis to it, which is the time axis, and that makes sense. And Michael, any last questions or comments, and then we can close the webinar?
No further questions for today's webinar. I'd like to give some information about the next one.
Please go ahead.
So the next webinar, if everyone can look at their screen, is titled Doing Business with Fortune Corporations. It will be hosted on Tuesday, August 9th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, same time as today's webinar. We encourage you all to visit the BLS section of the US PAC website to RSVP. And after this session, we'll be sending a recap with a recording and we also encourage you to fill out the post-webinar survey to help us improve. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you to Tim for the great presentation, and we look forward to seeing you at a future BLS webinar.
Tim, thank you very much as well for your time today and effort. We really appreciate it.
Great, perfect. Thank you so much.